Hey everyone, I'm Brian and welcome back to the Java course. Today we're going to be learning about control structures. Now, that probably sounds weird, but I promise it's a lot easier than it sounds. So, what are we learning today? Well, first of all, we're learning what a control structure is, and we're going to be learning about the specifics of each control structure, such as an if statement, which are conditional statements, and for loops and while loops, which are the two most fundamental loops in Java. So it's good that we get a basic understanding of them now. We're not going to go over sort of the use of every single thing in this unit, in this module. I don't know what to call it, whatever. Hello everyone, I'm Brian and welcome back to the Java course. Today we're going to be learning about control structures. Now, that sounds really weird, or you've probably never heard about it before, but I promise it's a lot easier than it sounds. So today we're going to be learning about what a control structure is, as well as some of the specifics of a control structure, such as an if statement, or as you can see in the bullet point, else if and else statements, or for loops and while loops, which are the two most fundamental loops in Java, so it's important that we get a basic understanding of them. That was a very long run-on sentence, but that's okay. So, first of all, what is a control structure? Well, a control structure is exactly what it sounds like. It controls the structure of the code. So these techniques make the code run in a non-sequential order. So what does that mean? Well, code usually runs, from top to bottom. But what control structures do is they alter the order of the code, or they can make code iterate several times. There are two types of control structures: decision-making control structures, such as if statements, and iteration, which is loops. So in the image below, you can see the sequence, which is, the normal way that code executes. You can see selection, which is like an if-else statement. So if this is true, do this. And then you have iteration. So as long as this condition is true, keep iterating this section of code. So first, let's go into conditional statements. A conditional statement basically says, if this, then this. If a condition is fulfilled inside of the parentheses of the conditional statement, then the code inside the brackets will be executed. So the operation inside the parentheses should evaluate to true or false. So for example, you can see in this section of code here, we have integer dice1 equals 9. Remember, that's the assignment operator. If you don't remember what the assignment operator is, I highly recommend that you go to the last video. Now, in dice2, we have a value of 6. So in the lines below, we're saying if the value of dice1 is greater than 6, then execute the code system.out.println this is greater than 6. Now let's look. Is dice1 greater than 6? I'll give you a minute to answer that. Just kidding. Your minute's over. The answer is yes, because dice1 is 9, and 9 is greater than 6. Therefore, the condition in the if statement is true. So we will print out this is greater than 6. Now let's go into our quiz. Will the line system.out.println these are not valid dice numbers run? Now, this one I'm not going to make you answer. I'll answer this one myself. So let's take a look at this code. We're checking the line that says system.out.println these are not valid dice numbers, and that is in the if statement, or rather the second if statement. If dice1 is less than 1, or dice2 is less than 1, or dice1 is less than 6, or greater than 6, sorry, or dice2 is greater than 6. So we have 3 OR operators, but they all have 2 operands. So if any one of these conditions is true, then it's true. Or rather, the condition is fulfilled. So dice1 is currently equal to 9. So let's go through each one. Is dice1 less than 1? No, it's not. Is dice2 less than 1? It's not. Is dice1 greater than 6? Well, dice1 is 9, right? So that means that dice1 is greater than 6. Therefore, the if condition is fulfilled, because the OR operator says if one of these is true, then the entire thing is true. So since dice1 is greater than 6, the entire if statement's condition becomes true, and it'll print out these are not valid dice numbers because it executes the code since the if statement is true. Now we get into else if and else statements. If the initial if statement is not fulfilled, it moves to a chain of else if statements. And you don't have to use these, but if you want multiple scenarios, then it would be more efficient to use them. So here's a good example. We see our code from the previous slide, I guess, that says, print out these are not valid dice numbers, else if dice 1 plus dice 2 is greater than 10. So if the dice's numbers are valid, in this case, so both dice 1 and dice 2 will be between 1 and 6, we're checking, is dice 1 plus dice 2 greater than 10? And if it is, then print out, you win. Yay, you won. Woo. If everything else fails, the else statement actually gets triggered. This is kind of like the default statement, if all other statements that come back before it in the block aren't executed. So let's check this code. If the dice numbers are not valid, then print out they're not valid. Now, that statement is false. Let's say it's false. So let's say we have dice 1 being 3 and dice 2 being 4. Then we go into the else if statement, because the first if statement was false. Now the second one is else if dice 1 plus dice 2 is 10. Well, if dice 1 is 1 and dice 2 is 4, it won't be true, because 1 plus 4 is not greater than 10. So it'll go to the else statement, and it'll say you lose. So the else statement basically is there if all other situations fail. Now, just like the else if statement, you don't need an else statement. So you don't always have to put it in there, but if you need it, it is there. Alright, now we're going to be getting into loops. Loopity-loopity-loop. A loop is a control structure that iterates code multiple times depending on certain conditions. What I basically just said there is that it loops code. That's literally it.
There are two primary types of loops, for loops and while loops. In the image below, you can actually see the iteration structure. So like while this is true, keep iterating that section of code until the condition is false, and then move to the next branch of code. A for loop is the first loop that we're going to be going over. It's set to iterate a certain amount of times, and there are 3 parts to this loop. If you can see in the image below, you can see all 3 parts in there. So first we have the initialize loop variable, which is the first part. We're initializing a variable, such as I, let's say, and we're making it equal to a certain value. We have the termination condition, which is when the loop should stop. So while this condition is true, the loop will keep looping. But once it becomes not true, it exits the loop. Lastly, there's the update statement, which is updating the code. Now, we have incremental and decremental operators, as you can see in the image, and in this case, we can say that the incremental decremental operator basically just adds or subtracts the variable by 1. The condition is actually checked at the beginning of each for loop. Or, not each for loop, what am I saying?
The condition is checked at the beginning of each iteration of the loop. So, let's try to explain this with the image. We're saying for int I equals 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. Okay, cool. So what it does is it says, alright, is I less than 5? Well, yes it is, it's 0. So it'll iterate, and it'll go through the code once. And it'll add to I. So I will become 1 because of the incremental operator. So now I is 1. And is I less than 5 now? Well, yes, because I is 1. So it'll go through the code again, and add to I again. And it'll go 2. Okay, I is less than 5 still, so it'll keep looping. I is less than 5 when it's 3. It'll keep looping. And it'll keep doing that until I becomes 5. And it'll say, alright, now we have a problem, because I is equal to 5, and 5 is not less than 5. So what ends up happening is that it exits the loop. So it'll go through 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it'll stop at 5. So it is iterating 5 times, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, those are the values of I. Next up, we have a while loop. A while loop's a little bit easier to understand. So it's set to iterate a certain amount of times while a certain condition is true. And the condition is checked at the beginning of every loop. So we have to kind of be a little bit cautious with this one. Or actually, no, sorry, let me rephrase that. We have to be cautious with loops in general, because the problem is that you can get something called an infinite loop. So if the condition never becomes false, your code will continue to loop forever. And ever. And ever. In the image below, we can see while dice 1 is less than 10, dice 1 is equal to dice 1 plus 1. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, while the value of dice 1 is less than 10, add 1 to the variable dice 1. So this while loop will keep looping until dice 1 becomes equal to or greater than 10. Next we have, or rather I should say finally, we have the do while loops, which are pretty funky. Okay, I'm never doing that. A do while loop is essentially the same thing as a while loop, but instead of checking the condition before the loop begins, it checks the condition after the loop happens. So essentially what this means is that the loop will iterate at least once, because it'll do the thing, it'll iterate whatever code's in the brackets, then it'll check the condition. So even if the condition doesn't work at all, it'll still do it one time before checking the condition and say, oh, well now you can't loop anymore. So it'll go through at least once before the loop ends. So that's the difference between a do while and a while loop. And they're both important. You can make a while loop, like you can make each of them with each other, if that makes any sense at all. Hey, this is Brian from like the future. I added this a couple days after. But we're going to be going over our if statements, for loops, and while loops with actual comprehended code. So this is the setup that I have for my main class. If you are confused with it, I highly recommend that you go back to the previous videos because Dev explains this extremely well. So let's give this a shot. So let's say we have an integer named x, and it's going to be equal to 5. So we have a variable that we created, and it's an integer. Its name is x, and it holds a value of 5. Now let's make an if statement saying if x is equal to 5, then system.out.println yay. So we have a relational operator here, the double equal sign. So what we're saying here is we have a variable x, which is equal to 5, and we say if the value of x is equal to 5, then we print out yay. So if we run this, it prints out yay in the terminal because we're printing out to the console. Now, if I made this x equals 6, and let's say I made an else statement here, and I made system.out.println not yay, because we are sad that it is not a value of 5, and we try to run it. It'll say not yay, because x is, not equal to 5, so it goes to the else statement. Now, if I made an else if statement, saying else if x equals 6, then, oh goodness. Well, first of all, there would be a lot of coding errors. Alright, so if we run this, we get maybe yay, because x is equal to 6, but it's not equal to 5. So it's not equal to 5, then it checks if it's equal to 6. And then if it's not equal to 5 or 6, then it goes to the else statement. So that's basically the gist of an if statement. Now let's go into the for loop. So this one's pretty simple to understand. Let's do for int I equals 0. I is less than, let's say, 5. I plus plus. Now, we're going to be doing something about scope later, but for now, what we have to understand is that we can use I as a variable inside of the for loop. So if I do system.out.println I, we're effectively printing out the value of what I is. So what will happen is this will print out 0, then it'll loop again, print out 1, then print out 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then it won't print out 5, because once I hits 5, it exits the for loop, because I has to be less than 5. So let's see what happens. There we go. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have printed 5 lines, so we can tell that it looped 5 times. And we can also tell the variable, or the value of the variable of I. So that's pretty cool. Now, if I were to create a integer called sum, which would be equal to 0, and I did sum plus or equals I, or let's do sum equals sum plus I to make this a little more comprehensible. What sum equals sum plus I means is that we are adding I to the sum. So let's see what happens. Let's do system.out.println sum instead of printing out I. So sum is currently equal to 0, and every time it loops, sum will be added to I. So the value of sum will be added by I. So if I run this, it should print out 1, 3, 6, 10, or 0, 1, 3, 6, 10, because it's adding 0, then it's adding 1, then it's adding 2, and then 3, and then 4. So it'll go 0, 1, 3, 6, 10. Alright. Now, last but not least, let's go into while loops. This one is a little bit interesting. So let's say we have, let's say we have a variable, and we're going to call it x, and it's going to be equal to 5. Alright, I'm going to say while x is less than 10, x plus plus, x. So, or actually, let's just do x equals x plus 1. It effectively means the same thing in this case. So x equals x plus 1. We add 1 to x every time it loops. And it'll keep looping until x is equal to 10. So my guess is that this will go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It'll print out 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's see. Oh, that's a little bit unexpected. It didn't print out 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It printed out 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now the reason why this happens is because we are adding 1 to x before printing it out. Remember that the lines are precedent, or rather I should say the lines are important. So if we have x equals x plus 1, and we read this from top to bottom, we're saying add 1 to x, then print out x, right? So if x is equal to 5, it'll add 1 to x, which will make it 6, then it prints out 6, and then it loops again. Adds 1, prints out 7, adds 1, prints out 8, adds 1, prints out 9, adds 1, prints out 10, and then as soon as it sees that it's 10, when it goes back to the top, then it will cancel the loop. It will stop looping. Alright, now what if I said int x is equal to 11? Now, let's have a system of out.print line to end the program. So whenever the program ends, we'll just, put a debug statement there saying that the program ended. So if I make this equal to 11, and I say while x is less than 10, well, it shouldn't loop because it's greater than 10 already, or it's equal to 10. So it just prints out end. It skips the entire while loop and goes straight to the next line, which makes sense. Alright, now what if I did do while x is less than 10? Well, we know from our lectures that this should actually loop once, because it will not check in the beginning, but in the end. So it'll do x equals x plus 1, system.out.println x, and then it will check if x is less than 10. Alright, so if we run this, it'll print out 12, because we're doing 11 plus 1, print out 12. And then it says while x is less than 10, and then it checks, oh, is x less than 10? Well, no, now it's not. So it just ends the program there. So that's a pretty basic understanding of, I guess, if statements, for loops, and while loops. And you'll be seeing them a lot more as we progress throughout the track. Alright, previous Brian, back to you. So that's about it for today. I know this was a lot to digest. So in the next episode, we're going to be starting functions and actual methods, and what those are exactly and how they will work. But until then, thank you all for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next episode. Alright, peace.